Reena Virk was a 14-year-old girl, and just like any teenager, she wanted just a couple of things. One of those things was freedom. She came from a loving family with strict parents who just wanted the best for their children, who just wanted to protect them from the world and the naivety of youth. But what she wanted even more than freedom was acceptance. She wanted to fit in. An Indian girl in a town predominantly populated by families that had very little in common with herself and with her own family. Her cultural differences may have created some roadblocks in trying to blend in with her community, but she tried her best to make friends. It was her connection to these friends that would eventually leave her broken, bloodied, and tragically to the very end of her short life. I want to say before we get into it that I did not watch Hulu's Under the Bridge. I made that choice consciously because I did not want to confuse fact and fiction. A lot of time these miniseries about real crimes can tangle on the line between life and drama for the sake of telling an interesting story, and I didn't want to potentially say something that wasn't entirely true. So this video is based solely on articles and an archived MSNBC documentary from 2011 called Bloodlust Under the Bridge. Thank you to Internet Archive because I was able to watch back-to-back clips of that show. They actually interviewed Nicole Cook and Missy Pleash, two of the girls involved in the initial assault, as well as Rebecca Godfrey, who not only grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, where the story takes place, but wrote an entire book about the murder of Reena called Under the Bridge. I've listed all my links below, including the link to Internet Archive, so check that out if you want more information directly from my sources. Before we get too far into Reena's story, welcome to Creepycassettiyt. This is your place for horror in reality and beyond. My name is Dee, and here we talk about dark history, weird mysteries, true crime, and strange tales. If any of those things are interesting to you, please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss our chats. Please also like the video and share. We can all learn something from Reena's story. We can learn to be a little more compassionate, a little more kind, a little more protective of those who need covering, and a little less judgmental. And maybe we can learn not to draw conclusions about people before they have even had the opportunity to speak. Maybe the story will help at least one person to reconsider bullying another. This story gets dark, so be aware and be okay with clicking away if things start to trigger you. Stay well, my friends. Please remember I do research on my own and review multiple sources. If there's anything that needs to be corrected, or if you want to add any additional information on this case, please feel free to leave a comment below, preferably with kindness. Now back to the story. On March 10th, 1983, Reena Virk was born in View Royal, Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, to her father Manjit and her mother Suman. Reena's father Manjit immigrated from India to Canada and married Suman, who was Indo-Canadian. View Royal in the 80s and 90s, when Reena and her two siblings were growing up, was a predominantly white middle-class area. So the Virks were part of a community with a South Asian population of around 3,000 people. On top of this, they were devout Jehovah's Witnesses, when the majority of the South Asian population were practicing Sikhs, making them a minority group within a minority group. But Suman had grown up a practicing Jehovah's Witness, and the family adopted the religion. Reena's upbringing between her faith, her parents' views of structure for their children, and her ethnicity othered her in the eyes of her peers. She didn't celebrate holidays or birthdays. She held a little more weight than some of her peers, and she was a brown girl with jet black hair and full lips in a town that was full of people who did not look like herself. Let's paint a picture of British Columbia's capital, Victoria. It's the kind of place that's covered in beautiful flowers, picturesque views, inviting waters, and definitely not a place that is used to seeing violent crime. It's more like a retirement town or a place to go for a vacation. So the story we are discussing today still holds mental space for a lot of people who are around and aware of what had gone on in their beautiful city. I can only imagine the digs she had to dodge on the daily basis. All she wanted was to fit in. She wanted to find her place, but she really struggled to connect. She was constantly bullied for her weight, bullied for her ethnicity, bullied for her looks, bullied just for being different. It was a real struggle for her. There was at least one instance when some kids went as far to put gum in her hair, but she never talked about the bullying. She just kind of swallowed it. Reena was quiet and shy, making her an easy target for some of the terrible kids in her class. In 6th grade, Reena made her first friend, Missy Pleash. Missy was considered an outsider too. She was a tough girl, a bully dealing with her own insecurities, who also didn't fall into the ideal 90s aesthetic for women of model-esque thinness. Missy, with her dark curly hair and larger build, dealt with her own fair share of criticisms. But the difference is she would fight back, which I'm sure helped sway some of the other kids to avoid her wrath. Missy was the youngest in a household of 13 kids. By the time she arrived, her mother was already exhausted from raising her siblings. She was given a little too much freedom. She admitted in an interview with MSNBC that she would drink a lot, steal things, and beat up other kids. While the two were friends, Missy states she and Reena never really talked about what Reena was dealing with. Missy never stood up for her, even though there were times where she witnessed the bullying. When Missy moved away, the two girls lost contact for some time. That was until they ended up in the same group home. Missy because her mother was at her wit's end with her behavior, and Reena because she kept running away from home. It was in this group home that Reena and Missy met Nicole Cook. Nicole Cook was the 90s epitome of cool. She was skinny, pretty, popular, and confident, statuesque with brown hair and bright blue eyes. People gravitated to Nicole. Girls wanted to be friends with her, boys wanted to have her as arm candy. She had that kind of life Reena longed for. Nicole was in this group home for delinquent behavior and frequently running away as well. She was a wild card, a mean girl, the type of person who idolized malignant figures like John Gotti and took inspiration from LA gang life. She also boasted about stealing cars and was often found bumping 90s rap artists like Notorious B.I.G. or Puff Daddy. She and another girl, Kelly Ellard, were very close. In fact, Kelly and Nicole had been best friends since kindergarten. Nicole associated with a few other girls who will also play a big role in today's case. Their names were Gail Ohms, Nicole Patterson, and Courtney Keith. She introduced Reena and Missy to the other girls. Just like that, Reena was entwined in a toxic friend group. While she might have already been engaging in some less than savory activities prior to meeting this group of friends, she really started to immerse herself in their world. That means smoking cigarettes and weed, drinking, engaging in sexual activities with boys, the normal teenage experimentation, honestly. In the group home, she had more freedom than she did at home. She could stay out for extended periods. There was no one really around to check her for her bad behavior. So while most kids would have felt overwhelmed and frightened by the prospect of living with complete strangers, Reena embraced it, and she wanted to get into foster care so she could always have this sense of freedom. So she did something drastic and quite frankly unfortunate. She falsely accused her father of molestation, a move that the Virks believed was egged on by her new friends. This prompted a police investigation, but the Ministry of Family Services, who were equally responsible for investigating the claim in an effort to protect Reena and her younger siblings, did not investigate. They simply placed Reena in foster care and went on about their way. Which, if Reena's claims were real, they had an obligation to ensure that the abuse didn't continue, and she would have fallen through the cracks. For the few months Reena was in foster care, she bounced between 3 homes, but soon she grew tired of the foster care system and she was ready to go home. She revoked her claims, and for a few months she bounced between her parents' home and the foster care system. And side note about that, Reena's parents believed that had Family Services done their proper investigation, she would have never been pulled out of the home and never met those girls to begin with. During that time, Reena was kind of forming a connection to the little group of wayward tweens. That wasn't until Nicole Cook grew annoyed by the girl, which we know, considering she was the leader, would also prompt a separation between Reena and the other friends. Nicole sensed Reena's insecurity and her perceived jealousy, and she decided she didn't want to be friends with Reena, and she started to distance herself. Seeing as Reena's induction into the group was hanging by a very thin thread, sure, Missy and her were still best friends, but even Missy had grown angry with Reena. She'd found out that Reena had slept with her boyfriend, which caused a fracture in their friendship. Missy was ticked. Reena also took on the belligerent attitudes and behaviors of the girls. It's easy to be swayed by the pack mentality. That being said, she might have engaged in some mean girl behavior herself, something that definitely came to a head when Nicole Cook left her phone book at Reena's house. Reena took that phone book and started calling random numbers in it. When she got a hold of people on the other line, she spread some nasty rumors. She went around telling people that Nicole's eyes were contacts and her boobs were fake and that she had AIDS. The latter rumor being something that could easily damage your reputation in the 90s, and many didn't fully understand how the virus was spread. Some people thought it was something that could be contracted by simply touching a person who had the virus. Nicole was livid, so she and Kelly Ellard started making plans. They were going to make Reena pay. They were going to beat her up so bad she would never say another unkind word. Nicole's mother even overheard a conversation between her daughter and Kelly. During this conversation, the girls talked about digging a hole and burying Reena alive, as well as beating Reena up. Nicole's mom originally just thought it was a couple of shit-talking teenagers giving into their angst for a moment. She didn't believe that there would be anything more sinister to the conversation. I can only imagine how she felt finding out that there was a lot more truth to those statements than what she thought. Nicole's mother and the rest of the world would soon find out how serious that conversation was. On November 14th, 1997, 14-year-old Reena went home to spend time with her family. At that time, she was still in foster care, but she was living in between the group home and her family home. That weekend, she wanted to spend time with her family, so she bought an overnight bag with her pajamas and a few essentials. Her plan was to relax, maybe have a bubble bath, and just hang out. Reena was having a good time, but between 6:30 and 7 p.m., the phone rang. It was Missy. She invited Reena to a little impromptu gathering in a field behind Shoreline School in Saanich, British Columbia. Reena had heard rumors that someone was going to get beat up. She asked Missy if she was the target. Missy lied, saying that she was not the target and egged her on to come out. Reena was still on the outs with her group, and she thought this might be a good opportunity to reconcile, so she jumped. She told her parents she would be back later. She was gonna go hang out with some friends. Reena's mother, Suman, tried to talk her out of it, telling her that they weren't real friends. Her father, Manjit, also tried to get Reena to stay, reminding her that it was cold out and she can't just change her plans at the drop of a dime. She could see them tomorrow. Manjit noticed some apprehension in his daughter's face, almost like she didn't want to go out, but she was being pulled in by the idea of reconciling with the friend group. She fought so hard to retain in the first place. Reena left the house anyway. Anyone who's been the odd person out could understand why. This was one of the main things Reena wanted. Maybe she could salvage the situation. She met the group of 14 to 16-year-olds behind the Shoreline School. Several groups of kids were out there drinking, chatting, smoking weed and cigarettes. Within 15 minutes, one of the unruly youths broke a window at the school's property and the police were called. They quickly dispatched the group and the teens walked to the Craigflower Bridge. On the way there, Reena stopped to contact her parents, telling them that she would be home within the hour. But she was pulled along, walking arm in arm with a couple of the other girls. The other teens were trying to keep her from running away from the situation, and they shredded her bus pass so she couldn't just easily run off. She just walked, locked arms, while the other girls dragged her along. She must have known she was really the target, and all manner of thoughts ran through her head. The teens settled underneath the bridge, a smelly, dark, cave-like atmosphere, complete with discarded food wrappers and other waste. Definitely not a pleasant place to hang out, but it was fairly secluded and hard to see from the main road. Reena sat down on a tree stump, nervously talking, trying to settle the stress-related heart palpitations, just waiting to find out where this was going, trying to look unbothered and tough like her counterparts. Not long after arriving, Nicole confronted Reena. She asked Reena why she was talking smack about her. Reena called her a bitch. Nicole put a cigarette out on Reena's forehead. Reena pushed Nicole away and tried to run. Kelly jumped up in attack mode, followed by Misty, Reena's once best friend turned villain. She wanted revenge for Reena sleeping with her boyfriend, and she had just as much of a vendetta against Reena as Nicole and Kelly. Kelly's only real problem being that she didn't want anyone disrespecting her bestie. Gail Ohms, Nicole Patterson, Courtney Keith, and the only male in the group, Warren Glowowski, jumped in next. I couldn't even find a motive for the other four other than maybe pack mentality, blatant disregard for another human being, and the need to fit in. Someone pulled Reena to the ground. She desperately tried to wiggle away from the bevy of blows as a savage group of teenagers punched and kicked her while she was already down. They tried to set her hair on fire. Other kids put cigarettes out on her skin as well. About halfway through the assault, all that Reena could say was, "I'm sorry," with tears streaming down her face, singing the cuts and bruises on her face. Most of the teen onlookers who were not involved in the fight scattered pretty immediately after it started. There were just a few other kids who stood by, witnessing the whole ordeal. The attack lasted about a minute until one of the witnesses yelled for them to stop, and surprisingly, they did. leaving a badly beaten Reena in the mud beneath a smelly bridge, holding onto herself as if she was trying to piece her bruised and bloodied parts back together. She was severely injured from the attack, but she managed to get up and slowly drag herself over the bridge, trying to get to the bus stop and hopefully back to the safety of her parents. She thought she was home free. She thought that was the end of it. But most unfortunately, Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowacki followed her across. Warren didn't even know Reena. He had no reason to attack her. He had no reason to even be mad at her. The two followed her over that bridge and continued the assault, again punching and kicking, slamming her head on the ground, jumping on her with their whole body weight, literally stomping her out. At some point, Reena lost consciousness. Glowacki and Ellard grabbed her by her heels and pulled her into a waist-deep section of the gorge waterway. Kelly forcibly held her head in the water, effectively killing the already unconscious teenager. Then they just left her there, a crumpled body half covered by stale water, slowly floating along the waterway. They went on with their lives like it didn't just take the life of another. After leaving the scene, Missy and Nicole took a bus to the group home. They signed in a few minutes after 11 p.m. curfew, and they went on about their night. Reena's parents, on the other hand, they didn't sleep that night. They tossed and turned. They were uneasy. Both laid there listening for any sound that would suggest Reena snuck back in. But when daylight broke, pure panic set in. Her parents started calling around. They called the group home. They even talked to Missy and Nicole. Both told Reena's mother they didn't know where she was. They hadn't seen her. Her parents' stomachs just aflutter with fear for their child's safety. Meanwhile, while the Virks were trying to get help, Nicole Cook, Missy Pleash, and Kelly Ellard met up at the scene of the crime, where Missy said that Kelly recapped the whole story about how she and Warren continued beating Reena, pulling her into the water and drowning her. She went as far as to mention that Warren didn't help her with the drowning either. The girls were looking around for anything Reena may have left behind. Missy states that Reena's shoes were found and Nicole put them in her bag. Nicole, when recounting the meetup following Reena's murder, acted like none of the story was told and she doesn't recall grabbing Reena's shoes. Let's also note that she completely denied having any involvement in Reena's murder. Maybe she didn't actually throw the girl in the water, but she definitely contributed and quite frankly instigated the first fight that night, which resulted in her flying monkey of a best friend taking Reena's life. By Monday, all the teenagers who were involved and the ones who just stuck around to watch were back at school, almost like any other Monday, except now the hall was buzzing with discussion. It seemed like the whole school was talking about how a girl had been beaten up over the weekend and no one knew where she was. Some had heard that she was gone. This was all before the authorities had even located Reena's body. By Friday, literally a week after the incident, the police had arrested all 8 of Reena's assailants at the Shoreline School. Some witnesses from that night came forward and told the police that they'd seen 3 teens walk over the Craig Flower Bridge and only 2 of them returned. With this information, they were able to pinpoint where Reena spent her final moments. The next day, a dive team and helicopter went out looking for her. The helicopter spotted her 1 kilometer or 0.62 miles from the original scene of the crime in shallow water. She was partially clothed, covered in dark bruises, and what clothes she was missing was found not far from her body, having been pulled away by the waves. They covered her with a white sheet and transported her body for autopsy. Her autopsy report told a story of unspeakable cruelty. Her abdomen showed signs of numerous severe blows, bruising all over her face and head, a sneaker-shaped bruise on the back of her head. The pathologist reported that even if she had not drowned, she more than likely would have died anyway. Some of her injuries were consistent with that of those who had been hit by a car. They found 18 small pebbles in her lungs, and it was those pebbles that confirmed to pathologist Dr. Laurel Gray that Reena was still alive when she was placed in the water, but they can tell she was also unconscious when she drowned. Back at the police station, all 8 of the teens were questioned. Parents were being filled in on what was going on with their children. Some of their mothers were distraught. Some didn't believe what was happening, couldn't believe their children would be involved with such a heinous activity. Most of the 8 teens said nothing. They weren't going to give up their friends or themselves. Kelly and Nicole went as far as to make a pact not to implicate each other in the murder. 11 witnesses came forward relaying to the police that Kelly had bragged to all of them about having murdered Reena. Side note, I don't have the names of of all the witnesses, if a name has been found because their statements play a larger role in the case, they will be included. What we do know is that some of the 11 witnesses were part of the Shoreline Six, the name given to the 6 girls who were not directly involved in the murder but participated in the initial attack. A jacket Kelly wore the night of the murder was confiscated and placed in evidence. They found salt water on the sleeve at the waist of the jacket, consistent from the time spent in the waterway. One witness named Robert Harvick, who was 16 at the time of the murder, recalled seeing Kelly at around 11:15 p.m. He noted she was wet, but she wasn't shivering, and the night was a little chilly. I'm sure at that point, adrenaline is all that was keeping her warm. She asked for a cigarette, claiming to be stressed out. When Robert asked why she was stressed, she told him that she'd gotten into a fight and had pushed a girl's head under the water. It was Robert's father who convinced him to relay this information to the police. Shandell Naismith, a 15-year-old who was friends with Kelly and other members of the Shoreline Six, recalled how Gail Ooms called her the night of the assault and told her about what happened. She hadn't been out of the house that night and was not directly involved. On November 19th, 5 days after the murder, she talked to Kelly about it. Kelly took her across the bridge and basically gave her a reenactment of the scene. It really sounds like Kelly, prior to being arrested for the murder, had no trouble admitting to her the part she played in it. But as you'll see later, she has trouble copping to her actions when she's being judicially held accountable. Which, remember, we said the area of the gorge Reena was pulled to was waist deep water. This was November in Canada. It was cold. What reason would Kelly have to have gotten into cold water with a jacket on? Just saying. Why would it be covered in fresh saltwater stains? After some time, the witnesses started spilling their recollections of the night while attempting to diminish their involvement. Eventually, between what they learned from the 8 involved and the witnesses from the night, the truth came out and the main suspects were revealed. Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowowski were singled out as Reena's murderers. They were the ones who continued beating Reena up. They were the ones who dragged her to the water. Kelly was the one who held her unconscious body under. Not that the other 6 people played no role in the events of the night, but Kelly and Warren were the last ones to see her alive and were possibly the ones who had issued the final blows that would have more than likely killed Reena had she not eventually drowned. The first trial took place on February 9th of 1998. 3 of the girls, it's not clear which 3, pled guilty to assault causing bodily harm. Just 4 days later, the other 3 went to trial and were convicted of assault causing bodily harm. We don't know who pled guilty and who went to trial. At the time, their identities were protected because they were still minors. Between April and May of 1998, all 6 were given sentences ranging from 60-day conditional sentences to 1 year in jail. Kelly and Warren were charged with second-degree murder. Warren went to trial on April 12, 1999. He was 17 at the time. His team requested a publication ban. The judge dismissed it, so the press could run coverage of the case, something the defense wanted to stop to avoid muddying up their client's reputation further. He was 16 when the murder took place, and if we're judging a book by the cover, he wasn't exactly what one might picture when they think violent teenager who was involved in someone's death. He wasn't exactly giving danger. He was short, lanky kid with curly brown hair and dark doe eyes. But there was a rage bubbling beneath Warren's veneer. He was angry at himself, his parents, the world, which is reasonable when you learn that his home life was tumultuous. His mother was an alcoholic and she was not involved in his life. His father traveled around a lot for work, and at some point he remarried a new woman and moved to California without his son. Warren was living with a friend when the murder occurred. Parental love and affection was lacking. He was pretty much abandoned by both of his parents, which is heartbreaking, and no kid deserves to deal with that kind of pain. So his anger was understood, not a justification, but understood. While it's not clear if Warren actually knew anything about Reena prior to the attack, what was clear is that the assault was an opportunity to let out some of that rage. And maybe in the minute it took for the fight to start and end, he hadn't completely shaken off the adrenaline spike. One thing was clear, he continued his attack when he had the opportunity to walk away. He attacked. He had no real connection to Reena, but he kept going. On May 3rd, 1999, he admitted to attacking Reena, but he insisted he had not been the one to kill her. He hadn't held her beneath the water. That was Kelly. Of course, Kelly's defense team denied it and wanted to push the blame mainly on Warren. Kelly's jacket from the night of the murder, along with testimonies from both Glowowski and the 11 other witnesses, sealed both Warren and Kelly's convictions, even if Warren's testimonies were called into question, because because he lied a staggering number of times during his police interview. A few days after his admission, Kelly's lawyers applied to have the case read in youth court to potentially lighten the sentence. That appeal was rejected, and the Supreme Court of Canada confirmed Kelly would be tried as an adult. The trial for Warren continued, and on June 2nd, 1999, he was convicted of second-degree murder. On June 13th, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. Then on March 9th, 2000, it was Kelly's turn. She had her first trial on the charge of second-degree murder. Kelly's upbringing, unlike Warren's, was stable. Kelly didn't deal with abandonment. She wasn't neglected. Her parents were divorced, and while that may have been a source of unease for her, for all intents and purposes, her home life was decent. She had what she needed. Her parents had her back the entire time she was on trial. Her dad even going on record with the media, arguing with Reena Virk that his daughter was innocent, stating she didn't even know Reena. What did Kelly have to be so angry about? What caused her to release her most explosive anger on Reena? Was it just in protection of Nicole? Sure, she might have been a protective friend, but this was not her fight. She didn't have to get involved, and she definitely didn't have to drag an unconscious Reena into a gorge and drown her. What on earth would have snapped in her brain? What on earth snapped in the brains of any of the people involved? Meanwhile, Kelly's legal team argued there was a conspiracy amongst the girls. They were placing more blame on her to save their own skins. This theory was partially supported because one of the witness testimonies from a girl called LB, who lived at the same group home as Kelly, said that she told her about the murder. She stated she was in the bathroom brushing her teeth when Kelly came in and bragged about holding a girl's head underwater for 5 minutes. This account was challenged when a corrections officer for the detention center named Tony Garcia testified that the girls would never have been in the same bathroom at the same time. That testimony was called into question. One witness who was not in on the attack, a girl named Marissa Bowles, testified to having seen Kelly and Warren follow Reena across the Craigflower Bridge. And remember that name because she is going to come back a couple of more times during this recap. The prosecution argued that Kelly was the most aggressive of the 8 people involved. She tried to claim self-defense, and I'm not quite sure who she was saying she needed protection from. Certainly it couldn't have been the badly beaten teenage girl who was already on the ground. Or did she just feel she needed to be part of the attack to prove herself in the group? The self-defense angle really bothers me if she was claiming self-defense from Reena. Like, the fight was over. Everyone could have gone on about their business. Instead, you literally stomped that girl into the pavement. A bunch of people testified to the fact that she was trying to get away and you followed her across the bridge to beat her up some more. But it's self-defense. Get the fuck out of here immediately. Well, the jury was not about to play those games with Kelly. She was convicted of second-degree murder. Both Warren and Kelly applied for appeals. Warren's appeal was rejected in November of 2001, while Kelly was granted a new trial in February of 2003. While she awaited trial, she was released on bail, which was revoked March of 2004 because she was charged with the assault of a 58-year-old woman at a Vancouver park. The charges were dismissed, however, the victim stating that Kelly hadn't been in on the attack, instead it was her pregnant, and I emphasize this because why the hell is this woman being violent with life inside her, friend who had actually attacked the woman. The argument for her appeal, her team believed the jury was swayed by the incessant news coverage and believed the Crown asking around 18 separate times in the original trial why the witnesses would give false testimony about her actions may have skewed jury opinion. During that trial, a schoolmate testified Kelly bragged about killing Reena, again, as she always does. Warren Glowski testified that he'd watched Kelly drown Reena. He testified to a potential detriment seeing as anti-snitch culture is pervasive in prison, but he wanted to help. At the end of the day, the jury was deadlocked and the judge declared a mistrial. In February of 2005, Kelly went back on trial. By April 2005, the trial went to a decision. She was once again convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 7 years. But the roller coaster continues because in 2008, a British Columbia Court of Appeals overturned the conviction. They argued that the judge's instruction to the jury about Marissa Bowles' testimony was erroneous. They felt like the judge should have advised the jury not to take her testimony as entirely credible because her testimony had changed multiple times between the interview that she originally gave the police and the 3 separate trials. In 2009, the Supreme Court chose to uphold her conviction and her sentencing. There were too many people who came forward confirming Kelly confessed to the murder multiple times right after it happened. Her jacket placed in the gorge that night provided physical evidence of her whereabouts, and she admitted being there that night. Not to killing Reena, but definitely to being involved, so I'm really not sure what else there was to appeal. All 8 of the teenagers spent time in Victoria's Youth Custody Center for part or all of their sentences. We don't really know what happened to the Shoreline 6 during their time in lockup, but we know what happened to Warren and Kelly. Warren didn't join a gang or fall in line with the tough, dangerous types people often morph into to survive their time behind bars. Instead, he received counseling, attended some self-help classes, and formed connections with people who just wanted to do their time in peace. During his time in lockup, he learned that he was Métis. Métis describes someone who is of European and indigenous heritage. This discovery helped guide him in his rehabilitation. He participated in restorative justice programs and indigenous healing circles. He showed deep remorse for his participation in Reena's murder. In 2004, he applied for parole. His request was denied. In 2007, accompanied by an indigenous healing circle, Warren met with the Virks for his second parole hearing. Manjit Virk was conflicted. He didn't want to shake hands with Reena's murderer, but Warren gave a heartfelt apology, an apology that moved the couple and provided them with the inkling of healing. Warren had been the only one who apologized to them face to face, and they forgave him. In fact, Suman had this to say of Warren. He was an angry, scared little kid who was trying to prove something in a negative way. Today, I think we see a young man who has taken responsibility for his actions and is trying to amend the wrong that he did. He was granted day parole, and the Virks backed him. The parole board determined his risk of reoffending was low. Day parole helps to reintegrate inmates into society slowly. While they are allowed to leave the prison during the day, sometimes with an escort, sometimes without, depending on the risk, they have to be locked up again at night. But it frees up their day to work, attend counseling, visit family, just have a life outside of prison. And in 2010, he was fully paroled. The parole board did not see him as a threat to society and confirmed he would be able to safely reintegrate. Kelly, on the other hand, hasn't really showed any remorse. She still argues her innocence. While in prison, she participated in smuggling and partaking in illegal substances. She eventually underwent treatment for substance abuse, and her behavior improved. Between 2015 and 2016, she became pen pals with another inmate in a different facility, a man named Darwin Dorazan. Dorazan was behind bars for a sentence of 6 years and 9 months. This sentence was a result of a series of 11 violent break-ins between 2010 and 2011, one in which ended with him spraying bear mace in the face of one of the residents. He and another man had also been implicated in the kidnapping and eventual murder of a drug trafficker. Dorazan would become her boyfriend and then the father of her 2 children. Yes, she was allowed conjugal visits and made a whole family from behind the bars of a penitentiary. In November 2017, she applied for conditional day parole, which she was granted. At the time, she was 8 months pregnant, and she wanted parole to take parenting classes, attend appointments, and arrange care for her child. While the parole board still had their concerns because at that time, Kelly was still refusing to accept full responsibility for her actions. Over a decade later, and she was still giving excuses and coming up with new ways to tell the same story that would take some of the blame off of her. They took her progress into account, however. She quit partaking in substances, took a job in the prison library, and she was showing signs of rehabilitation. The parole board granted her day parole. They likely believe that becoming a mother had softened her and helped her to sympathize with the Virks now that she had her own children. Day parole is probably a bit of a relief for her because her baby daddy's parole had been revoked for violation and he was back behind bars. Her parole was extended multiple times from there. She and Dorazan had another child in 2020. Her day parole was temporarily suspended from August to October 2021 because of a domestic violence incident she did not report, as well as testing positive for codeine use. Her most recent psychological evaluation from 2018 states Kelly Ellard, who now goes by Carrie Sims, is at high moderate risk for future violence over the long term and a relatively low risk over the short term. Your risk would be on the higher end should you abuse substances or associate with negative individuals. At some point between 2017 and 2021, Kelly married and divorced Dorazan before he just up and abandoned his little family. So now Kelly, or Carrie, lives in a community-based residential facility where she battles the discomfort of being a single parent, raising 2 kids with a high cost of living and low wages, partially incarcerated. She only recently showed any kind of real remorse and accountability when she found out Hulu was making Under the Bridge, mentioning she felt that bringing the incident up would be disrespectful to the family and could re-traumatize them. I think she just doesn't want her crime being pulled back into the spotlight for further scrutiny. And I want to briefly discuss some of the theories behind the attack. Some people would argue that this was just a bunch of teenage ticking time bombs, just a few angry kids who felt unseen and unheard with tragic home lives. Some came from parents dealing with addiction, some were neglected, some were growing up in unstable housing situations. These are all valid reasons to be angry. None are good reasons to be violent. The late Rebecca Godfrey, writer of Under the Bridge, explains some people use violence because it makes them feel powerful and dominant, almost like they romanticize the act, and in that moment they're out of control. They aren't thinking clearly. If you combine that with the lack of a moral compass, you get brutality. Not that any of that takes away from the culpability of these individuals, but I can only hope the Shoreline Six, Warren Glowacki, and Kelly Ellard are continuing to seek therapy and making better decisions nowadays. Manjit and Simone Virk became avid anti-bullying activists. They gave lectures at schools, teaching children to speak up when they see bullying or are being bullied. They talked about what happened to Reena at the expense of their own pain, wanting to give the world real change to decrease the number of kids who deal with the impact of bullying. They sought to help kids understand the difference between healthy and unhealthy friendships, helping them to understand how to treat others and embrace people who may be different from themselves. Manjit and Simone were honored with the Anthony J. Hume Award of Distinction, recognizing their dedication to community safety. The Canadian government further honored them by reaching out to Simone and Manjit for the support of a youth justice focused bill in 2011. They backed certain aspects of the bill with emphasis on keeping violent juvenile offenders in custody while awaiting trial and providing offenders with mental health treatment during that time. Manjit even turned his pain into a book. It's called Reena, A Father's Story. His book was used in telling the story of Under the Bridge. Simone unfortunately passed away in 2018. But Manjit continues their work in anti-bullying and honoring Reena's life. So, to conclude, if I can leave you with one piece of advice, don't hang with people who don't respect you. Don't give them the time of day. Don't give them the privilege. At best, they talk shit behind your back and make you look like a loser. At worst, they physically or mentally abuse you. Who's to say that abuse won't turn into anything more sinister? Be careful, be kind, be open, be understanding, but protect yourself and the people that you love. Speak up, tell someone if you need to. Don't be afraid to seek help. And if you're someone who's dealing with bullying, there are resources. You should know who to contact. If it's something going on at school, you can talk to your teachers, your counselors, the principal, all the way up to the superintendent if you need to. If the bullying reaches a point of crime being committed, call the police. Don't hold on to these things. Don't let people mentally or physically abuse you or someone that you know. Please don't give up. While the majority of bullying incidents don't end in life-threatening violence, it happens, so be aware of that. You can check out www.stopbullying.gov for more information. Another piece of advice, as someone who was bullied elementary school and part of middle school, don't give up. A lot of times people fall into these cycles of self-harm and suicidal ideation. They're told all kinds of terrible things about themselves. Personally, any insult you can think of, I've had thrown my way relentlessly. And to this day, I deal with some residual effects of bullying, like negative self-talk and self-doubt, moments of low self-esteem. But people grow up, people move around, and they live life and they start to understand things. And I think this is why her story, it resonates. So it was one that I wanted to tell. And I really hope that this helps someone, anyone. If you want to tell your story in the comments, go for it. I want to offer you encouragement and love if you want it, if you need it, if it helps. And I hope we all learned something today. I wish everyone who watches this video happiness and peace. And I will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.